Hi, welcome to The King is Coming. My name is David. Doing a podcast today following up on the first part of a podcast I did, which is on the days of Noah. The first part of that, which you can watch, there's a link to it in the description box. I actually have a link to all of the uh, podcast archives, if you will, if you want to go back and watch all of them. But in that one, which was titled The Sons of God and the Daughters of Men, I focused on what the cause of the flood was, why God flooded the earth, and did, or tried to do at least, a deep dive into what the Bible has to say about that, and particularly about the Nephilim and how that plays into some things that are happening right now in our culture. But what we're talking about today, we're going to go in a completely different direction. I'm going to do this completely different than the previous video, in that we're going to look at the fact that there was a flood. We're going to look at what the scripture has to say about it. But mostly this is going to be, I'm going to give evidence that this was a real event. There really was a flood, that there's historical evidence apart from the Bible. There's archaeological evidence that this really happened. And we're going to look at that, and that's going to be the focus of this today. So let's get started. We're picking up in Genesis chapter 6, starting in verse 13. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits width, which I looked that up, that's going to be the equivalent to about 510 to about 515 feet. A width of 50 cubits and a height of 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark in its side, and you shall make a lower, second, and third decks. And behold, I myself am bringing flood waters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. And we're going to stop there, and we're actually going to skip a little ways. Most people know this story, at least, or somewhat familiar with it. One of the things I've found that's a big misunderstanding, even with a lot of Christians that should know the Bible, is that Noah took 2 of every animal into the ark with him, which is true. That is what God tells him, but that's not completely what God tells him. God tells him take 2 of every species of animal. But starting in chapter 7 in Genesis, it says, Then the Lord said to Noah, Come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. You shall take with you 7 of each clean animal, a male and his female, 2 of each animal that are unclean, a male and a female, also 7 of each of the birds of the air, a male and a female, to keep the species alive on the face of all the earth. So God floods the earth. The Bible says, chapter 7, verse 7, So Noah, with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives, went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. And it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. But the Bible also tells us in verse 11 of chapter 7 that the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and that the windows of heaven were opened. So it was water coming from above and below. And we're going to jump down to Genesis chapter 8 to read just a few verses. A piece of fuzz on my face or something, I'm sorry. Chapter 8, verse 1. Then God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind pass over the earth, and the water subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped. And the rain from heaven was restrained, and the waters receded continually from the earth. At the end of 150 days, the waters decreased. The ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month. On on the mountains of Ararat. That's really important. And so from here, we're just going to jump down to verse 20 of chapter 8. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered a burnt offering on the altar. And the Lord smelled the soothing aroma. And the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Yes, Lord, that is true. Nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. So this was a real event. I've talked to a lot of people personally about this, even people that claim to believe in the Bible, and very often get, well, yeah, I believe it, but I don't believe it was literal. I don't believe it was the entire earth. There was probably part of it that didn't get flooded, and there were people that survived. Respectfully, that's not what the scripture says. You either have to take it as completely the truth, or it's not the truth at all. But there's a lot of interesting things here. There's quite a bit of evidence to support that this happened. And I don't need this evidence. I believe it. The Bible says it's the truth. But it's encouraging to me that there is evidence. But the thing that's crazy is I showed some of the evidence I'm about to give on this podcast to some friends of mine, neither of which are believers. Very good guys, friends of mine, but they're not believers. And I showed them these things, and they didn't really have an answer they could give me other than, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is true, even though that does look like it. I was thinking, it sure seems like a lot of people go out of their way to find reasons to disprove the Bible when there is ample evidence. So I'm just going to throw it out there. There's a place in Kentucky called the Ark Encounter. This is a book that is all about it. I actually got this when my family and I went to this a few years ago. It's a picture of it. It's an exact replica of the Ark built to the size specifications that God gives, and it's a pretty interesting museum. Years and years ago, when I was taking some seminary courses, some Bible courses, in the Old Testament survey course, when we were looking at creation and evolution, we used a lot of the curriculum that's been done by Ken Ham, who is the guy that built all of this, or had it built. He's like the CEO of all of that. But he does a lot of apologetics on creation, and most of it I found to be very credible things that affirm the Bible and that affirm what we have in the Bible as truth. So just throwing that out there. It's a pretty neat place to go if you've never been there. When my family and I went, I think it was like 4th of July weekend, and so it was horribly crowded. But it was pretty neat. I think it's pretty expensive, but anyway, to the evidence. I've talked about that I'm going to present evidence for the fact that the story of Noah's Ark is a real story. And we're going to start with a little bit of background. The Bible tells us, which we just looked at, that the ark rested in the mountains of Ararat. Well, you have a mountain in the country, the modern country of Turkey, that is called Mount Ararat. And on it, you have this structure. Now, a lot of scientists have looked at this and tried to claim that this is the result of landslides. I don't believe that's a credible argument, and I'm going to give reasons why I don't believe that's a credible argument, but I believe that this that we were looking at is Noah's Ark. So far as everything I've looked at, this particular formation was first discovered in about somewhere around 1959 by a Turkish Air Force pilot that was flying over and took a picture. And from there, in 1960, a aerial photo of it was shown, probably this one, in Life magazine, again in 1960. A lot of people saw that. One of the people that saw that was a guy a lot of you have probably heard of named Ron White, who was kind of, I don't know that he had necessarily any schooling or degrees, college degrees in archaeology, but he was kind of an amateur archaeologist that did a lot of excavations on biblical things. And in 1977, I think he did the first serious study and research and look at this site. And I think probably a lot of the photos you're seeing are his photos. I think it's probably definitely worth mentioning that this site, the length of it is about 515 feet long, which would be right at 300 cubits, which God tells Noah to build this ark. One of the major arguments I've heard people make is how could one man and his three sons build this tremendous thing that would be, again, 500 feet long. It was like 75 feet wide. The simple answer I would give you is that God was with them, but also the Bible seems to indicate like people lived much longer back then. Noah was like 600 when he went into the ark. The Bible seems to indicate it took about 120 years for Noah to build this ark, which is actually interesting. I have a shirt that I got at the Ark Encounter. I should have worn it here. It says "Faith like Noah." To me, to the amount of labor and time that would take to build this, to get up every day for 120 years and continue building it, trusting in that what God was telling you was true, that is real faith. It's also worth mentioning that we're told in the New Testament that Noah preached to the people of his generation throughout the time that he was building this ark. And it's very interesting because he preached for like 120 years. Nobody got on the ark with him except his family. Nobody believed him. Although there was a point, I guess, where they did believe him. But in saying that, looking at these photos, people have tried to say this is a natural formation formed by landslides. Well, one of the things Ron White pointed out was that if you get close to it, you can see places in it. Like for ships, particularly ancient ships, the skeleton, if you will, the frame that the boat would be built on would have what you would call ribs. We have pictures of those for what it would probably look like. These photos you look at tend to show something that looks like it probably could be ribs of a ship going all the way around it. But I have several articles as well that have been written about this site, which, by the way, I should have mentioned, this site is in Turkey on Mount Ararat. It's known as the Durinpar site, I believe is the pronunciation. And this formation that is Noah's Ark, I'm just going to say it is about 18 miles south of the summit of Mount Ararat. But I have an article here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to look at parts of it. It's a number of articles I found on this. This one in particular is from Fox News, published in May of 2025. And the title of the article is Researchers Find Compelling Evidence of Possible Noah's Ark Remains in One Country. So I'm just going to read part of this article. The focus of the research, the Durinpar site in eastern Turkey, was first identified in the 1950s. Again, like 1958, I think I said. For decades, it's been speculated that the boat-shaped site once harbored Noah's Ark, but no definitive proof has emerged. Now an organization called called Noah's Ark Scans believes that recent soil samples point toward the site once housing ancient wood. Researchers collected soil samples from the site last September, again, this is May of 2025, and analyzed them. The results show significantly higher levels of organic matter and potassium compared to the surrounding areas. The findings suggest the presence of decayed wood or other organic materials consistent with a large ancient structure preserved within the mudflow. The soil composition is markedly different from the natural mudflow, indicating something extraordinary at this site. The 515-foot long formation aligns exactly with the biblical dimensions of Noah's Ark. Now, basically, what this article is saying is that the mud around it is one type of soil, but that the soil at this site itself is not consistent with all of the soil around it, that it's a different kind of soil. And I read further into the article, this researcher, who apparently is a geologist, that was interviewed for this article, was saying that it is most likely petrified wood, that in his opinion that's what it is petrified wood, that if it was the result of a mudslide, all of the soil around it would be the same, but in this one spot it's different. So that's interesting. But we have another article here. This one was published in the New York Post about the same time as the last one I read. This was in May of 2025. Noah's Ark site fully preserved, secrets discovered in radar scans, not what you'd expect to see. This one's a little longer. I'm not, again, going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to try to find the pertinent information. American researchers claim to have cracked one of the Bible's enduring mysteries after using radar technology to map the possible remains of Noah's Ark. It's exactly what you'd expect to find if it were a man-made boat consistent with the biblical specifications of Noah's Ark, Andrew Jones, an independent researcher, said. Let's see. The exact spot of the Durinpar site, a boat-shaped mound, is the same with the book of Genesis described dimensions as the ark. Jones used ground-penetrating radar to detect what appeared to be a 13-foot tunnel traversing the center of the formation. The same scans captured a trifecta of subterranean layers that were alleged to be dead ringers for the Bible's description of the boat's 3 decks. We just read about that. In other words, it was literally ship-shaped. And this is not me saying that. This is what the article says. Meanwhile, new analysis of radar data allegedly revealed center and side corridors or hallways running through the boat. Also uncovered were angular structures situated 20 feet beneath the surface that the team surmises could be quarters beneath a deck-like surface, making this potentially more than just a geological formation, as science had posted. This is not what you'd expect to see if the site were simply a solid block of rock or the result of random mudflow debris. Meanwhile, an examination of 22 soil samples collected from the site revealed that the suspected structure had lower pH levels, 2 times the organic matter. This is basically saying exactly what the previous article said, is that the soil is different. But it was, I believe, this team went in and found, it was a team of I believe it was Indian and Chinese archaeologists and scientists that went inside this structure, supposedly. I've seen things that claim this is a hoax, so I'm not going to say it's absolutely genuine, but I hope it is, because they brought pictures, including these, that are supposedly the interior of this formation that looks awful like something man-made to me. But aside from all of this that I've shown you already, and I have a lot more evidence. One of the things I've seen that's a stumbling block to a lot of people believing that the flood actually happened and that Noah and the ark were a real thing is they feel like, you have no common sense because that just doesn't make any sense if you believe that. But I would say, let's look at it from the point of view of having common sense. So the ark rested in the mountains of Ararat, which is in Turkey, and we just happen to have this formation on that particular mountain. It seems like common sense would say that this is Noah's Ark, but let's also look at the geography of it. Not only is this formation, which appears to be a giant boat, exactly to the specifications of size that God told Noah to build this thing, that is probably petrified wood, that the soil is different from everything around it, meaning it wasn't the result of a mudslide, that it seems to probably have ribs, and it has quarters below it that look like they were human dwellings. It has 3 decks. Aside from all of that, just geographically, look where it's at. It's in Turkey. Let's look at a map of the part of the world where Turkey is. So if you look at this, just southeast of Turkey is the modern day nation of Iran. In the ancient world, that would be Persia. And I believe part of it would be a country called Elam, but it would be Persia. Southwest of it is Egypt. Far south of it is the nation of Israel. But in between Turkey and Israel, you have Syria, which in the ancient world would be Assyria, the Assyrian Empire. And you have Iraq, which would be ancient Babylon. And it's interesting, we're going to get to the Tower of Babel here pretty soon in one of these podcasts, but there's a good bit of evidence that there was a Tower of Babel as well in historical writings. Alexander the Great wrote about the Tower of Babel and where it was at. But where was the Tower of Babel at? It was in Babylon. That would be modern day Iraq. It was at the Tower of Babel where people decided this is where we're going to live and we're not going anywhere. And God had to change the languages to break them all up. This is right in the middle of all of these areas geographically important to the Bible. All of these are the nations spoken of in the Old Testament. And Iraq, Babylon, Babel was right in the center of them. Meaning probably Noah and his descendants started out in Turkey, modern day Turkey, ventured south, decided to stop there, and when God broke up the languages, they went in every direction, and that makes up every nation on the modern map. Every nation spoken of in the Old Testament. It just makes sense. But in saying all that, we're going to look at some different evidence now. So I remember hearing a story several years ago, and this type of story was on the radio. In fact, it was in 2017 because I have several articles here, and that's when they were all written. This type of story normally piques my interest because I usually look for something that affirms the Bible, even though these stories always try to point to something, anything besides what the Bible teaches. But it was that the first known, possibly oldest remains of a human being had been found, and they weren't found at this time in 2017. I think it was in like the 1920s or 30s, but they had done enough study on it, and with modern technology had determined this was the oldest human remains that had ever been found. Now, I think they may have found some older since 2017, but I'm not even going to go in that direction. But I remember hearing in this radio thing talking about this, the ridiculousness of what they were saying is that they were saying this was the oldest human remains that they knew of that they had, and that this was obviously someone who had died in a tsunami. And the only thing I could think of was no, they died in a flood. So looking at several articles we have on that. This one's from a news source called Courthouse News. Not familiar with it, but I have several. But it's first known human tsunami victim discovered 6,000 years later. And it just says scientists believe they have discovered one of the earliest human victims of a tsunami after finding geological sediments in a 6,000-year-old skull. 6,000 years would approximately be about the time you would need for the flood to have happened. Researchers from several institutions, including the University of Notre Dame and University of South Wales, have conducted sedentary studies on a unique archaeological find first unearthed in 1929 and hypothesized that the person in question was likely killed in a tsunami similar to the one that hit Indonesia in 2004. We have one here from Reuters that says, also from 2017, skull found in New Guinea was world's oldest known tsunami victim. Skull fragment from the coastal site believed to be dated from 6,000 years ago. Scientists say sediments in which bone found bear hallmarks of a giant wave. And then one from the BBC, ancient skull, oldest tsunami victim. Scientists have said it was also possible that the person had died and been buried just before a tsunami happened. Research involved studying grain size and composition of sediments. Among them were microscopic organisms from the ocean, similar to the ones found after a 1998 tsunami, which killed more than 2,000 people. This person was killed in a flood. I mean, to me, it's just stupid to even try to get around that. But I digress. We're going to move to the next thing. So the next thing, and again, I'm going to show you just screenshots of articles because there's a lot of articles, and it's another one of those things. Just about every article I find, they're trying to find some scientific reason to say. Nothing to see here, move on. This has nothing to do with a flood or anything. There's plenty of other reasons why this could have happened. But Mount Everest, the highest point above sea level on Earth, 29,000 feet, which is about 5.5 miles high. Scientists have found in a number of instances, not just one isolated event or a few, in many instances have found fish fossils at the top of Mount Everest. How did they get there? There was a flood that flooded the entire Earth and covered the entire Earth, and so there were fish that died there when it receded. This is also an article from the BBC. We keep finding strange ocean fossils on the top of Mount Everest. Explorers keep finding marine life fossils at the top of Mount Everest. As weird as that sounds, there's a perfectly good reason why. Yeah, there is. There was a flood. Their presence hints at how the Himalayas were formed about 50 million years ago. It's also a key piece of evidence for plate tectonics. When the supercontinent Pangaea broke up about 200 million years ago, the Indian plate began moving northwards towards Asia. So I'm going to stop there. I've only got like 2 more sentences I'm going to read in this, but it's funny they don't want to give credit to the Bible, which is a reliable source that's been around for thousands of years. But they'll talk about Pangaea, which there's no hard evidence that this was a thing, although I think it's a good chance it was. I'm just saying they're going the route of we're going to base this on this theory when we have this book, this ancient book that explains why this is the way it is. But the idea of Pangaea, if you're not familiar, is that all the continents once fit together much like a puzzle and formed one gigantic continent. And that they broke apart, as they say, 200 million years ago. I don't believe the Earth is that old. I have a whole video on that right here. But if you look at the way the continents are shaped, I'd say there's a good chance that this really was a thing. But in my opinion, if anything broke it up, it was more than likely a global flood, particularly when the streams within the Earth and the springs within the earth broke up from within the earth. That's probably what broke up Pangea, if it actually was in existence. But moving on, eventually it collided with the Eurasian plate, forcing the land, including the part of the seabed in the ancient Tethys Ocean, upwards. This enormous collision created the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau, lifting the ocean fossils to over 8,000 meters or 26,000 feet in sea level. It's so much easier to believe what the Bible says. There was a flood. Everest was covered in water, and when the waters receded, the fish there died. But here we have another article. This one comes from The Guardian, and basically it's about that they've found things under the ocean through scans. They can't even get that deep in the ocean, but through, I think, radar scans and perhaps satellite scans that show what appear to be human dwellings really deep under the ocean, meaning at one time this probably wasn't covered with water at all. So again, this article is a little lengthy. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but again, it's from The Guardian, and it will probably mention it in this article, but if it doesn't, the gentleman that they're citing, which I'm putting things of this article up, Robert Ballard, is the guy that discovered the Titanic, the resting place of the Titanic under the ocean. This is from September of 2000. Marine archaeologists have found the first evidence of people who perished in a great flood of the Black Sea that has been linked to the story of Noah's Ark. Using robot underwater vehicles more than 300 feet below the sea's surface, they have begun to map a rolling landscape fed by meandering streams and marked with wattle and daub houses that was flooded more than 7,000 years ago. The discovery was announced yesterday by Robert Ballard, the scientist who discovered the wrecked Titanic. Dr. Ballard began exploring the Black Sea in the Hull registered ship Northern Horizon and used side-scanning sonar to look for interesting shapes on the seabed over a 200 square mile area, 12 miles off the Turkish coast, again, off the coast of Turkey. The instruments detected targets worth a closer look, so video cameras mounted on underwater robot submarines were put to use. We found two ancient ships, Dr. Ballard said. What we were trying to do in our wildest dreams, which is exactly what happened, was find a structure that was evidence, not a sunken ship, not trash, not geology, but characteristic of human habitation. In other words, somewhere people were living. They found a rectangular area up to 12 feet by 25 feet over which an ancient mud and wooden house had collapsed. And they found tools of highly polished stone together with fragments of ceramics. But he does not claim to have found the landscape of Noah. We cannot say in any way, shape, or form that this is the biblical flood. All that we can say is that there has been a major flood and that people were living here when it happened. We prefer to stick to the facts, and who knows where the facts will lead us, okay? But you're saying there was a flood, but it probably wasn't this flood. Really? Probably the final thing I want to look at, and I only take some of this with a grain of salt because this doesn't necessarily support the story of Noah. But as many who have looked into this topic know, practically every ancient culture has in their historical stories that are handed down a story of a global flood. In many cases, a global flood where God or the gods became angry and punished mankind, and in some of them, actually a single man and his family that built a boat and survived it. Although in none of these stories is it someone named Noah, except for the Old Testament, the Jewish ancient Hebrew stories. But I think it's worth mentioning that all of these ancient cultures affirm that there was a flood. We're talking the Sumerians, which I think are regarded as the oldest written language. The ancient Sumerians wrote about a flood. Ancient Mesopotamia had legends of an ancient flood. It's actually told, I believe, in the Epic of Gilgamesh. I think it's worth pointing out most of the Epic of Gilgamesh is believed to be about 4,000 years old, but it was compiled over several thousand years, and the sections of this long poem that contain news of a flood are about 1,800 years old. But Sumeria, Mesopotamia, ancient Greece, ancient India, ancient China, Mesoamerica, that being the culture of the Mayas and the Aztecs, ancient Norse culture, they all have stories of a global flood where mankind was punished. The correct answer is God, the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, flooded the earth and saved Noah and his family. But some may look at this and say, why am I bothering telling this story? One, it's part of a thing I'm doing where I'm trying to do great stories of the Bible. I'm trying to do them basically chronologically, and this is where I have come to at this point. But it's worth mentioning this story hinges on God's judgment being brought on the earth. And while God promised he would never wipe out all humanity again, and while God promised he would never flood the earth again, there is more judgment coming. There is another time when the entire world is going to fall under judgment. And I believe we are right on the cusp of that based on what I see in the Bible. This isn't just a wild guess I have. This is based on data that we find in the Bible based on what is happening now. It's coming. And while God said he would never flood the earth again, Jesus said regarding this time I'm talking about, this future time at which the judgment of God is going to fall on the earth, the wrath of God is going to fall on the earth. Jesus said it would be the worst time in human history, that there had never been a time like it before it, nor would there be after it. This is coming. I have multiple videos on this. That's the King is coming. That's the whole basis of this channel. Jesus is coming. And if you want to avoid the judgment of God, the King, Jesus, is the one who paid the debt and faced the wrath of God in your place. And the only way you can avoid facing the wrath of God, either if you're alive when this happens, and I believe it's very soon to happen, but even if it's not, if you were to die before then and you don't have a relationship with the Lord through his son Jesus, you will face the wrath of God for all eternity in a place called hell. And how do you go to hell? Well, the Bible tells us God gave us commandments, and that we've all broken those commandments, the 10 commandments. Because we've broken these commandments, we've offended God through our disobedience. And the Bible calls this disobedience sin. The Bible tells us that the punishment for sin is death and eternal separation from the blessings of God in a place called hell. But God sent his son, his only begotten son, Jesus, who is God born in the flesh, born as a man, living a life of a human being. And he lived the life God has called us to live. He lived a perfect, sinless life. And because he did that, he laid that life down freely as a payment for the sin debt that all of us owe. And he did this being crucified on a cross for a crime that he was not guilty of. And while he was on the cross, the wrath of God, the full wrath of God, fell upon him that should fall on us. He took it upon himself freely and paid every bit of it, every bit of the sin debt that we owe. and he died, and they buried him in a tomb. But after 3 days, he rose from the grave and walked forth from the tomb, and he did so to prove to us, number one, that the payment that he had made on our behalf, God has accepted his sacrifice in our place. But also, he did it to prove his power over death, over the grave, and that he had conquered sin. And the Bible tells us that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. That God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that through him the world might be saved. You must believe in Jesus. You must trust in the blood that he shed on the cross and ask his forgiveness for sin. Admit to Jesus that you are a sinner and ask him to forgive you, and acknowledge him as King and Lord of your life, and you will be forgiven of your sins. Judgment is coming. And whether you're alive at the time it happens or not, we were all going to face judgment one day when we die if we do not have a relationship with Jesus. The Bible tells us that Jesus will return. And again, I believe it's very soon. The Bible tells us that when Jesus returns, he's going to judge all according to our faith in him. I hope that you'll think about that if you don't have a relationship with him. And if you want to know how to have a relationship with him, the first video link I have in the description box. I'll have the archives of all of the podcast, but the first link in the description box is going to be a link to a video. It's a brief video, but I will explain to you thoroughly, but also in a way that's very easy to understand, how you can be right with God through a relationship with Jesus. Please watch that video. Not because I want views, because I want you to know the truth. I don't want anyone to face eternity in hell. I don't want anyone to be caught off guard when the Son of Man, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ, returns. And I believe it's very soon. I have 3 videos on that where I mark evidence, in my opinion, that he is coming very, very soon. You can watch those videos too. Please consider these things. Thank you for watching. I'll have another one up here pretty soon, hopefully. Have a great day. Thanks. God bless you.